This is Konejotako speaking on October 18th. I've decided to write several scripts at once, and that's because the editor told me he was free these days. So it's better for me to have several scripts ready in case he finishes early and has another one to start working on. Honestly, I think this is going to be the shortest video in this series, and that's because, believe me, I could barely find 4 or 5 things that were cut from the novel. Anyway, I hope to be surprised as I develop this topic. Before we start, a thank you to Jarte, Fernando Binario, and Senor Patata. I'd like to say something about you all, but I'm sorry to say this is the first time I've seen you on the channel, so I don't have any words to dedicate. Although I have seen that Senor Patata was already a member before, so thank you very, very much. Also, another sincere thank you to my English audience. You know who you are. But let's begin. Welcome to Cut Content from ReZero's first season, episode number 6. Since I'm sure you've already forgotten the question I asked you at the beginning of the last video, I'll tell you what this episode covers. The episode starts with Subaru waking up and touching the area that had been dismembered moments before his death. This episode covers everything he did during the loop where he didn't ask to stay as a servant, but as a guest. Specifically, it covers up to the part where Subaru discovers the identity of the killer. In itself, there wasn't much content cut, but I'll report the most interesting parts anyway. When Subaru woke up, although the anime adapts everything in its entirety, there was something it couldn't adapt to the screen, and that is Subaru's thoughts. Upon waking up screaming and seeing the sisters looking at him scared, he quickly remembered that he must get along with them, and so he changes his attitude instantly. This is a prelude to how Subaru is increasingly forcing himself not to take time to process things and to go along with appearances. And as we know, this will eventually bring him emotional and physical problems. Another thing the anime did a good job of portraying, although at first I thought it didn't, were the scenes with Betty and Subaru. While the scenes we saw of her in the anime where she consoles Subaru and then in another explains what curses and magic spells are, those scenes did happen in the novel, but they happened in a single meeting, whereas in the anime, they decided to separate them for some reason. I imagine they did it to make Subaru do something on the other days of this loop. This resource of separating a scene into several days was also applied with Subaru and Ram. In the anime, they meet on 2 different nights, and a conversation they had on one night in the novel is animated. But here, they decided to make it seem like it happened on 2 different nights. In fact, right there they mentioned something interesting that I'll tell you about in detail in a moment. Another nice detail that I liked, and which was omitted, were the excuses Emilia made to be able to wait for Subaru, who was in the library. Although Emilia was there as part of her routine of talking to spirits and grooming Puck, it is said that she was making many excuses in order to extend her stay and find out if Subaru would come to that place. But let's now talk about the scene of Ram and Subaru chatting in the room. You see, while both the anime and the novel mention the 3 stories Subaru was reading at that moment, it's also true that the anime doesn't cover them completely, and that's understandable. After all, it's impossible to ask for a one-to-one adaptation. When Subaru comments on the story about the Witch of Envy, he says it was a disappointing story. He says that because he claims that in the tale there was no documented chronological data or anything like that, but rather it was just a narration of reasons why you should fear her. Then the tale of the nation's dragon was covered. Here, it is mentioned how the dragon protects the nation, cures diseases, and even revitalizes crops. More details are also mentioned about what the nation's hero did for Lugunica in the past. And only then do Subaru and Ram have the chat where they talk about what the dragon will do now that the royalty with whom it made the pact has died. I remember when I first read this, I wondered what the hell the dragon was doing during the first season. I also remember thinking it was doing something important and interesting, but with recent revelations from the novel, we learned that this whole time it was always harassing children. Anyway, let's move on to the most interesting tale of the chapter. The most interesting tale from this part is the one about the ogres that Subaru tells Ram. Remember that this is a tale Subaru brings from his original world, and it talks about the communication problems they had among themselves, as well as the ignorance of the villagers. As I said at the beginning, I know you don't remember, so I'll repeat what the story is about. This tale is about how a red ogre wants to become close to the village's townspeople, so his friend, a blue ogre, offers to attack the village. Then the red ogre would come and scare him away, thus sealing his popularity with the villagers. Because the ogres are red and blue, many people assume it's an exact representation of Ram and Rem's story. But in reality, I think the author just wanted to make an allegory of a similar situation. After all, the blue ogre's act of sacrificing everything for the red ogre can be compared to the sacrifices Rem made for her sister since she lost her horn. It is said that Rem became so obsessed with being the support for her disabled sister that she no longer even had a sense of individuality. This is reflected when she genuinely believes it's not necessary for her to dress up nicely, or when she thinks the absolute ideal of beauty is her older sister. She thinks all of this due to her inferiority complex, and this complex causes her to lose herself, just as the blue ogre would eventually disappear from the life and story of the tale Subaru narrated. And just as the red ogre lamented the absence of his blue friend, Ram laments the misfortune her sister had fallen into in order to help her, but she simply doesn't know how to make her stop idealizing her. Nor does she know how to make her realize she doesn't have to feel guilty about the incident that night. On top of that, the detail that helped me better understand this tale, and which supports this point of view I'm narrating to you, is the following. There comes a moment in the story where Subaru and Ram say that the villagers in the tale are idiots, and they say it because of how ignorant they were in detecting the feelings between the ogres. In the end, they agree that if there had been communication, perhaps none of these disasters would have occurred. If we apply this to Rem and Ram's origin story, we could say that the idiot villagers are the inhabitants of the twins' village. Those who placed expectations and goals on two girls who simply didn't want to bear that responsibility. Ram didn't want to be in charge of restoring the Oni clan, and Rem didn't want to continue living in her older sister's shadow. In fact, in case you don't know, the leader of Rem and Ram's village, Satanta, had bigger plans for Ram. He planned to use her as a weapon against the kingdom. He had even contacted Ram for this. But returning to the interpretation of the tale, there comes a moment in the chat between the protagonist and the pink-haired girl where she breaks character and says something strange, something that didn't have much to do with what she thought of the tale itself. She says that if the red ogre really wanted to be happy with the blue ogre, then he should have cut his horn before it all became a lost cause. This last line fits very well with a part of the twins' story, specifically the part that came after Ram lost her horn. In theory, after that fateful night, now that Ram was not the superhuman that Rem had always admired, the relationship between them should have equalized or at least changed. But that never happened. It only caused a greater sense of hopelessness in her younger sister, a situation from which she has not recovered even now at the time of this episode. It is because the situation did not change after Ram lost her horn that she thinks perhaps it would have been better to cut it sooner. As an additional detail, I had heard that in the ReZero Limb game, there is a variation of this route where instead of telling Ram about that story, Subaru ends up telling it to Rem. It is said that at that moment, she becomes enraged and very hostile towards Subaru. Unfortunately, I don't have the excerpt of this to show you, but I imagine the Rem from that story got angry because she felt Subaru was belittling her sacrifice. And this makes sense because for a reason, Ram in the canon asked Subaru not to tell this to her younger sister. But continuing with my thoughts on the ogre tale. Something I remember reading in the nearly 70 side stories that take place during the month Subaru lived in the mansion is that it is said in certain excerpts that Ram had tried several times to get Rem out of her emotional lethargy but never succeeded. That is why when Subaru managed to help her break away from that past of hers, she was grateful and angry. Grateful because her sister was finally freed from the trauma that was eating away at her, and angry because the person she loves most in the world is in love with an idiot. In fact, one of the side stories that I remember very fondly and that happens around these days is a novel where Ram travels to her old home days after Rem falls in love with Subaru. It is said that she goes specifically to a monument that Roswal made for her extinct village. This monument honors the fallen from that day, and from time to time, Clind is sent to do cleaning and maintenance. There, far from the others, Ram brings a bottle of champagne and prays for a moment in honor of her parents. At the same time, she says that she came to inform them that Rem was finally able to make peace with the events of that night. And I think that's everything regarding the tale of the ogres and its possible implication with the sisters' lore. As I tell you, it's safe to say that Tape made that tale for us to relate it to the sisters' story, but there's no way for me to tell you that this is the way the author expected it to be interpreted. Changing the subject, I would like to tell you the names of the side stories where the extra details I narrated a moment ago happen, but I don't remember the specific names where those tales occur. As I said, at the time when I was reading everything, I took notes of the most interesting facts for my 3-hour iceberg, and a mistake I made was not writing down the names of the stories where I read these facts. But getting back to the original topic of the video, everything happens normally until the part where Subaru goes to the mountains and spies on the Marquise's mansion. Something that was interesting and gave us another clue as to how deteriorated the protagonist's mind was, but was unfortunately omitted, are some thoughts he has regarding the knife he took from the mansion. He was seriously thinking about using that blade to cut himself to stay awake at night. He had also considered ending his life with it if necessary for any eventuality. But that would be all regarding the cut content. Let's go to the tweets. Another week, another hour of my life I waste while exploring the jungle of the author's tweets. Honestly, it's customary for the author to post 30 to 40 tweets, but only about 5 or 6 end up being relevant for the video. Anyway, anything to follow the format. First, there's a tweet from the author where he seems to acknowledge that Subaru's plan to collect information in this loop didn't help him much. And that's because going around asking if someone killed him doesn't sound like the best of plans. This is supported by the novel where Subaru mentions that in this loop, he has had almost no opportunity to interact with the other residents of the mansion. Second, there's a tweet where the author states that if you ever have problems, you should trust Byako. There's nothing wrong with this, but as I said in my previous videos, I still find it strange that Betty let Subaru die in his first loop in the mansion. In fact, Tappy has opened a Q&A session these days. I'll take the opportunity to ask him about this. With any luck, he'll read it and answer me. I hope to give you good news. Third, there are 2 tweets from the author about how that map seen for a moment in a frame of the anime is a map that he personally made for this episode. In fact, he comments that at the center of this map is the Great Flugel's tree, a tree that we will later see has importance. While an illustration of the dragon and the witch appears later, it is not confirmed if it was also made by the author. Fourth, Tappy says he calls Rem's weapon a morning star, because although he is aware that this type of weapon has another name, he simply made this change for convenience. Fifth, then there's another tweet where the author highlights that Amelia is still wearing the flower accessory that Plum gave her in the first chapters. Sixth, this tweet took me by surprise, and that's because while I'm aware that neither lions nor whales exist in ReZero, I hadn't realized that horses don't exist either. Whales don't exist because there are simply no oceans for them to live in. And while a creature called the white whale exists, it only coincidentally has that name, but the animal itself does not exist. The same happens with lions. They don't exist, but the word is still used to talk about the royal family of Lugunica. This week's break time surprised me. My first encounter with break times was in the 3rd season, and in those days, the break times adapted things the novel omitted. But since these break times are from the 1st season, well, it seems they use it more to add original content from Subaru's days in the mansion. On this occasion, this break time seems to have happened in the loop where Subaru was a guest, and that's because he's in his tracksuit instead of his butler clothes. The protagonists talk, and we just see Amelia react to the news that Subaru has decided to stay in the mansion as a guest, while Subaru playfully fights with Puck, and they make jokes at the candidate's expense. Truthfully, aside from the initial surprise that this is original content, as I always say, I recommend watching it if you enjoy the peaceful moments of the series. And that has been the entire recap of episode 6. I hope you liked this video, and as I always say, a like and a comment help the algorithm like you have no idea. But tell me, what surprised you the most about what was omitted in this episode?